Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Courtney Cherico and I'm the Content Marketing Associate here at GuideStar. We are so excited to have you all join us for this sneak peek at Kivi Leroux Miller's 2016 Nonprofit Communication Trends Report and what it means for your year-end fundraising. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. First, we will be live tweeting this event using the hashtag NPCOM2016. Follow us at GuideStar USA and join in on the discussion. Though we've blocked off some time at the end of today's event to answer your questions, we're more than happy to answer them as the event progresses as well. As the old adage goes, if you have a question, it's likely someone else does as well. So we want to make sure to address any and all that you might have. To submit a question, simply navigate to the Q&A box on the right side of your screen. Please do not use the chat box function. The Q&A box may not be showing up right now on your computer. If it isn't, simply look for that Q&A button near the top or bottom right-hand corner of your screen and select it to activate that box. Feel free to submit questions there, including any technical ones that come to mind at any time during the event. Don't worry if you missed a point or were unable to write down a note. We're recording today's event, and you'll receive that recording via email within a few days to watch as many times as you'd like. We'll also have a follow-up blog post with any additional questions on our blog, trust.guidestar.org, next week, so keep an eye out. With that, I'm happy to introduce Kivi Leroux Miller, President of the Nonprofit Marketing Guide and Content Marketing for Nonprofits. As a certified executive coach through coaching, training, and consulting, Kivi helps nonprofit communications professionals both learn and love their jobs. She teaches webinars and workshops several times a month and writes a top-ranked blog on nonprofit communications at nonprofitmarketingguide.com. So without any further ado, let's get started. Kivi, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Courtney. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today. We did this survey. We just closed it on Monday night. So you are literally getting the first sneak peek of the data, and I'm excited to share that with you. So as we go through, I'll be sharing lots of things that we've discovered with you, and I'd like you to think about what's the biggest surprise or most interesting finding that I've shared with you today, and I'll ask you to chat that in with us a little bit later in the presentation. So I do want to apologize. You're going to see some pretty ugly slides, like I said. We just closed it on Monday, so I've had less than 72 hours to really go through the data. And so what you're going to be seeing is pulled right out of SurveyMonkey, so it's not prettied up yet. But we will be prettying it up over the next several weeks, and we'll have nice infographics and a full report for you in January. So the data that I'm going to share, where is this coming from? Well, we do this online survey every November. This is our 6th year doing the survey. This year we added a lot of questions. It was long, so if you were one of the people that participated, thank you, because I know it took you a while. So we typically get around 2,000 people. This year we had about 1,600 complete the full survey. The rest of these numbers are pretty typical for who takes this survey every year. 88% from the U.S., 8% from Canada, the remaining from a few other places around the globe. About half and half in terms of under $1 million or over $1 million in budget. This year we have a few more people in the over $1 million category. And then across the spectrum of missions types of work that you do. So it's a pretty diverse group. We're pretty happy with the diversity of the survey takers. Who actually takes the survey from within nonprofits? Well, we are a nonprofit marketing guide. We tend to focus on the communications staff. And so 42% of the people that took the survey were communications staff, either managers or coordinators or assistants. 19% identified themselves as development or fundraising staff. 17% were executive directors. And we'll do some comparisons between these groups, these sort of three sets, the communications staff versus development staff versus executive directors, to see how they answered the questions. So let's take a look at some of the goal data. And again, this is, you're going to have to bear with me. These are straight out of SurveyMonkey, so they're a little hard to read sometimes, and the color scheme is not necessarily ideal. But we asked people this year, let's start up here in the upper left. Let me get my little pen. Let's start by looking at this one. So this is everyone who completed the survey. We asked them to put their communications goals in order of importance for their job for 2016. And this order is a little bit different than last year. Last year we saw engaging our community and retaining donors as 1, 2. And you can see those top 3, top 4 have shifted a little bit. So it's great that retaining donors is getting as much attention as acquiring donors, and engaging community is not that far behind. So this is a good thing in that, people are focusing on the right things, but it's a little difficult because there is no clear priority either. And so that can lead to maybe some debates within the office about what you should really be working on. If we look at how this breaks out by position, you see some things that you probably would expect to see. So I'm looking over here now at communication staff. Engaging the community and brand awareness are the top goals, where the fundraising related goals are a little bit lower. For development staff, you see the opposite. Retaining and acquiring are more important than engaging and brand awareness. And then as we've seen in past surveys, executive directors kind of tend to float in between their communication staff and their development staff. When we asked people about how they felt about the work in terms of the responsibility they felt for it, we asked 2 different kinds of questions. One, are you personally responsible for fundraising goals, annual fundraising goals? And then, are you personally responsible for community engagement goals? And again, we ask these questions because we've discovered that how people respond to the survey and what they say is most important and which communications tools they want to use and how frequently they want to communicate within those communications tools varies greatly depending on how people answer this question. So you can see we're talking about the fundraising goals here. Communication staff, a big percentage have no specific fundraising goal that they feel responsible for. A chunk of them do, and a slightly bigger chunk feel somewhat responsible, but the largest chunk of communication staff do not, in fact, feel responsible for meeting annual fundraising goals. Now, of course, that flips. It's the complete opposite for the development staff, and then again, you find the executive directors a little bit in the middle. When we look at the community engagement goal, community building, community engagement, so these would be things like, do you feel responsible for the size of your email list or for your engagement metrics in social media? Not surprising, communication staff feel much more responsible for that than they do for fundraising. Okay, flip it over here. Development staff feel responsible for it, but a bigger chunk don't feel as responsible as the communication staff. And again, executive directors are kind of in the middle there. Okay, so that's where people are coming from. How does that then play out in terms of which communications channels people are going to be using and what that frequency is? So we asked people to put 13 different communications channels in order. And this doesn't change a whole lot from year to year. Like I said, we're in our 6th year, but there are a few little changes. So let me point those out to you. Website is always number 1. Traditional social media and email marketing always flip-flop back and forth. So you can see these bars are really close. And last year, email marketing was on top. This year, social media is on top. But really, I mean, the difference is pretty negligible. So it's always this sort of 1, 2, 3. And then in-person events, print marketing, those are usually number 4 and 5. And then things start to get a little more interesting down here. So what we've seen in particular is video and graphic social media. So I'm talking about things like Pinterest and Instagram when I'm talking about graphic social media. These are making big jumps. Every year they're scooting closer up the list. And in fact, eclipsed blogging this year. Blogging last year was higher on the list than both video and sort of graphic social media. So this is interesting, and it meshes with what we saw last year in Instagram as a particular channel making a big surge. So let's talk about how often people are going to be communicating. We get this question all the time at Nonprofit Marketing Guide. So we ask it in 4 different ways, not including social media. We talk about direct mail versus email, and then we talk about appeals versus newsletters. So this is the chart on how often people plan to send direct mail appeals, either fundraising or other direct calls to action. These are mostly fundraising appeals. And you can sort of see how the timing fleshes out over time here, with twice a year being the most common answer to this. This overall frequency is down a little bit. When we look at the report from last year, 36% were going to send quarterly or more frequently. So it would have been sort of these answers combined. And that's down to 33% this year. So there's a slight decrease in people's response here. Last year, our 2015 report was the first time that we had seen a slight increase. The previous 4 years were flat. Last year it went up a little bit, and now I think it's going down a little bit. But these are not significant, huge shifts in any way. Let's talk about newsletters. This is really about the same as we saw last year. Again, quarterly would be the most frequent frequency. And I think it's also interesting to note that a full third of nonprofits do not send any direct mail newsletter. Now, a lot of this has to do with that responsibility for fundraising and how important individual fundraising is. A lot of people will say, well, is this a bad thing? Is it a good thing? And my answer is always, I have to know what your goals are. If you're doing a lot of fundraising communications from individual donors, odds are you should probably be doing a print newsletter. But if you don't, then maybe you don't need one. Okay, so it really all has to go back to your goals. Let's go ahead and look at email appeals now. And as you can see, there's a little more diversity in how people are doing this. It's about the same as last year, but maybe a little less frequent. And so this is something I'm going to be looking into a little bit more, because a lot of us, myself included, are actually advocating that people email more frequently than they are. When I'm talking to individual people that I'm coaching, more often than not, I'm telling them to increase their frequency. So this is something I'm going to look into a little bit more, slice and dice the data, and try to figure out who's really doing what. All right, let's look at email newsletters. And again, you can see monthly email newsletters here would be the most popular frequency. Again, these are down a little bit in terms of overall frequency. In 2015, two-thirds, well, not quite, 62% were doing an email newsletter at least monthly, and now this looks more like 58%. So it's a slight decrease, but I don't think it's really too significant. Again, we usually recommend that people do monthly newsletters or every other week newsletters is the baseline. I think if you're doing it less often, if you're sort of one of the people in here, I question whether people are going to recognize your email in their inbox, and we delete email from people we don't recognize. Okay, so let's talk about social media a little bit, shifting gears. We asked some new questions this year, so I can share some of the overall trend data with you, and then we've got data for just this year. So again, we ask people to put the sites in order of importance, and Facebook and Twitter, 1 and 2, have been since the beginning of time, since the beginning of our surveys for the last 6 years. But we're seeing a couple of interesting things take place lower down on the list. Like I said, Instagram has really sort of made the big run and has continued to climb, jumping over LinkedIn this time in particular. Google Plus, is going down as a social network. Even Google recognizes that it's not really a social network. So we'll probably just drop that one from the survey entirely next year. But Instagram is definitely the big mover in this list. We also ask people which social media sites or apps they're most likely to experiment or play with in 2016. And so, it's just sort of interesting to see what people are thinking of. Flickr has made some changes to the way it operates. It's not just a photo sharing storage site like it used to be. They're trying to be a little bit more social, so that's interesting that people are looking at that. Periscope is the live video streaming app. SlideShare is for things like slide decks, Snapchat, Vine, etc. This is a new question. We asked people how often they expected to post to all of these different social media sites. So this is a little bit difficult to suss out here. We'll definitely be cleaning this one up, but this is the best I could get it out of SurveyMonkey. So what you're seeing here is if you say, okay, well, you know, where am I posting multiple times a day? This is the Twitter line, and this is the Facebook line. So if you're going to post multiple times a day, you're most likely to be doing that on Twitter and Facebook, and that certainly makes sense. And then the next one would be Instagram. If you look just at sort of the Twitter line, so this is this one, you can see that if you're going to be really using Twitter, you are likely going to be doing it, you know, once a day or multiple times a day. Same thing with Facebook, really. There are very few people that are only doing it, you know, once a month or a few times a month. Doesn't really make a lot of sense. So anyway, we'll be analyzing this data a lot more and looking at it in terms of which goals people picked, what kind of organizations they are, and relating some of this content back that way. We asked a new question about Facebook ads, how we were just curious if people had any kind of ad budget. This was actually a question that was suggested to us when we asked people on our mailing list what they wanted to see in the report. So, you know, not a huge bunch of people spending tons of money, but at the same time, I mean, this is, you know, you're pushing 50% of nonprofits here who are spending something on Facebook ads. So for those of you that haven't done any of that yet, even if you're just putting a couple $100s towards it, it might be worth experimenting with for you because a lot of people are doing that. Okay, let's look at some life at work questions, whether people actually like doing this work and what that work is like for them. And a lot of these questions are new. So we'll point out to you which ones are new. This is a question that we've edited a little bit. We used to ask, you know, time and money used to be in the list, let me put it that way. And of course everyone said, oh, we don't have enough time. Oh, we don't have enough money. We don't have enough resources. And so, you know, that wasn't a really helpful answer anymore. So what we tried to do is to say, okay, what does that really mean when people say that they don't have enough time or they don't have enough money? What is that really looking like? And so we gave people more specific answers. And so you can see how those were ranked. Too many competing priorities, urgent tasks taking over important tasks, too many interruptions, lack of clear processes and procedures, not knowing best practices, lack of internal coordination with other staff, lack of management support. That's what these answers are over here. And I looked at the difference between the development directors and the communications staff and the executive directors. Development directors and executive directors were pretty close to this order. The communications staff was a little different. So their top three were the same, but then this lack of coordination and lack of clear process was a little higher on the list. We asked a question about job satisfaction. So this is a brand new question that we haven't asked before. And we said, you know, tell us whether you like your job or not, basically, or if you're satisfied in your current position. Very satisfied, satisfied, neutral, dissatisfied, or very dissatisfied. So you can see the answers overall here. And then we have it broken out by these different categories. So I was very happy to see that communication staff are largely satisfied with their work, more satisfied than development staff, it appears. And there have been a lot of other studies about development staff being very unhappy people in our sector for a number of very legitimate reasons. So I wanted to see if the same held true for communication staff or not. You'll also note that executive directors tend to be the most satisfied. Maybe that's because they're the boss and they get to make all the decisions, but this was actually a little bit higher than I thought it might be. Couple more questions specifically for communications staffing. So we asked everyone, do you expect your marketing and communications staffing to stay the same, grow, or shrink? And not surprisingly, sort of status quo, stay the same for both. But I was happy to see that this number about growing is more than just a little sliver. So that's great. Unfortunately, there were a little bit of people who are shrinking. I suspect those are in organizations that are having bigger problems overall than just their marketing and communication staff. Now, we asked a series of questions just to people who identified themselves as communications directors or communications coordinators. And so that's why you're seeing this number drop from the 1,600 to the 700s, is there was a whole page of questions we just asked the communications staff. So we asked them to talk about how they felt about their work in nonprofit communications. A big chunk of them said that they were really passionate about the work and plan to stay in the field. This chunk are people who want to stay in communications and marketing, but not necessarily in nonprofits. This chunk is going to stay in nonprofits, but not necessarily in communications and marketing. And a very small percent said, hey, this is just a job for me. I'm not really committed to it either way. So again, I thought this was really good news. I was happy to see this. We asked people how they felt about their skill level. And again, this was interesting to us at Nonprofit Marketing Guide because we've been doing this training for going on 10 years, and certainly when we started, everybody was in the lots to learn category because it was really a new thing, and the internet was still kind of a new thing at work in particular. So it's very encouraging to see these numbers shifting and to seeing a lot more people feel comfortable and capable in the work and fewer people feeling like newbies. Now, if you are a newbie, that's fine. We're going to keep giving you help too, but we're going to keep trying to grow and professionalize the field. So this was nice to see as well. We asked how long communication staff felt they would stay in their jobs. And again, these numbers were actually higher than I thought they would be given the overall turnover in the nonprofit sector. But it seems like there's a fair amount of good job satisfaction within the communications field. We also asked about how communications staff felt about their relationship with their bosses, with their executive directors or CEOs. And these were pretty good too. This question is really a duplicate of a question that was asked in a study about development directors. And so we're going to be comparing some of this data to some of the data they found in that study. And the development directors were not as happy with their bosses as the communications directors appear to be. So those are the sort of top level bits of data that I was able to pull out. Like I said, we just closed the survey less than 72 hours ago, so we haven't really been able to do all the real cross-tabbing and in-depth analysis that we'll do over the next couple of weeks. So when the report actually comes out the first week of January, you'll get the basics in much nicer graphics, and then we'll have all those demographic differences. We do a pretty in-depth statistical analysis of the data to find out where the real differences are. Are communication staff saying things different than development staff? Does it matter how big your organization is? Does it matter what the mission of your organization is? We also asked for annual salary information for the first time, and so we'll do an analysis of that and share that in the report. We asked about the average size of a communication staff, so we'll compare that to the budget size of organizations, to the missions of organizations. So, you know, we will be able to tell you in January if your overall organizational budget is in this range, this is the average of what your communication staff size should be and how much you should be paying those people. And I know those are really big questions that people want answers to, so we just need a few more weeks to do that data analysis. We also asked about years of experience, and then we have some open-ended questions that we'll be analyzing where people were able to type in what they felt they needed to be more successful and what was really exciting for them and scary for them about their jobs in 2016. So now I'd like to have you sort of just off the top of your head, based on what you've heard me talk about for the last 25 minutes, what was most interesting to you? What was most surprising to you? This will actually be a great help to me as I'm writing the report over the next couple of weeks. So I'd like to know what really sort of piqued your interest. If you want to go ahead and send that in now, I guess on the questions window, am I saying that right, Courtney? I want to make sure we're telling people the right place to type that in.
Yes, please use the Q&A box.
Okay, great. So what was the biggest surprise or most interesting finding for you? Go ahead and just chat that into the Q&A box real quick. We'll see what some of you think about the results. Someone says, with social media, I was surprised that the use of LinkedIn wasn't third on the list. You know, LinkedIn is one of those channels where you either have a really good specific use for it as a nonprofit or you don't. So, you know, again, this is really people using the platform at work to further their nonprofit's goals as opposed to their own personal professional use of it. And some nonprofits have great uses of LinkedIn, others have zero use for it. So I think that's probably why it isn't as strong. People are commenting on the job satisfaction. Surprising how low media relations is a priority. Someone is surprised that Flickr is reinventing itself and loves Periscope. Great. People are surprised at the use of Instagram. Lots of people are commenting on the rise of Instagram. Some comments about frequency of communications. And lots of comments about the job satisfaction. Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. That's going to be helpful to me, like I said, as I sit down to write this thing. So what we want to talk about next, and we can do Q&A both about trends historically, what I saw in the report this year, as well as year-end fundraising. So start to think about questions in all of those categories. But let's talk about a little bit about year-end fundraising and some of the implications for some of these larger trends, not just for what we saw this year, but overall. So the first one I would say is really this sort of debate between retention and acquisition. And we've definitely seen retention climb in the trends report as a top goal. And, you know, I think that's wonderful. All of us who do consulting work and are trying to get nonprofits to do the things that are going to have the biggest bang for the buck are constantly talking about retention. And the retention statistics overall in our sector are pretty pathetic. You know, if you were a salesperson with the numbers that we have in our sector, you wouldn't have your job for long. So there's a lot of room for progress, and it's not that difficult to do. A lot of it comes down to having a really good communication strategy and not just asking all the time, but really reporting back to people on how you're using their money, really making them feel included in the work of your organization, really expressing your gratitude for their contributions to that work. So having a good retention strategy is pretty much the same as having a good communication strategy with your donors. So as you're putting together your year-end fundraising plans, you need to ask a lot, but you also need to think about those other pieces of communication, those thank you letters. So those of you that were doing a bang-up job with Giving Tuesday this week, congratulations, there was a lot of success, but you're not done. You know, take a deep breath and then get back to work on the thank you communication and on the reporting back to people. You know, let's just say you raised $20,000 on Giving Tuesday. You need to be sending out a lot of thank you communication in the next week, and then after that, I would start communicating about how you're going to spend that 20 grand. If it wasn't obvious from your ask. And even if it was obvious, you want to reaffirm with people how you're spending the money. You want to do the same kind of thing with your big year-end pushes. Yes, you're going to be asking a lot, but you need to shift right into thank you communications and reporting right as soon as you're done. You know, second week of January, you need to be launching into more of the gratitude and reporting. As you're doing this, I really encourage you to think about other ways that people can help and exploring and incorporating those engagement opportunities into those communications. Some of you have very easy ways to do this. You need a lot of volunteers. Others of you don't have any opportunity for people to volunteer, and so you need to think about other things that people can do to express their values. That's why people give, because their values are consistent with your values, and they want to change the world. So tell them other ways they can help express their values other than writing money or writing checks, giving you money. Maybe there are things they can do in their personal life. Maybe there are things they can do with their friends or family that are going to help make the world a better place through your eyes. Figure out what those things are and talk about those things too. Sending frequency. When you're doing these kinds of campaigns, you have to be much more aggressive with your frequency of communication. This is not the time of year to sort of go with the average like you might do during your slower times of year. You need to really amp it up. If you don't ask, you will not receive. So I'd say at least weekly at year end, which we are now in officially, and then you need to do it daily, if not twice a day, in the last 48 hours of the year. Now again, I'm talking about email here. This is primarily driving online fundraising at this point, but you want to really push people on the deadline to give, okay? And then finally, I would say trust your communication staff. You saw from the survey here that people are dedicated to this work. They're investing an incredible amount of time in their own professional development and learning what's going on and trying to make big change. And that is certainly a frustration that I hear on a regular basis when I'm mentoring communications directors. They are striving to do their best, and yet they run into these barriers, often with their bosses, executive directors, who are not as well versed in the best practices and are a little afraid to try things. So if your staff are doing a good job at staying up to date on what other people are doing and they're truly investing in their professional development, listen to them. Let them be your internal experts and really drive some of the strategy. So with that, I am happy to spend the rest of the time taking questions. And again, this can be questions on year-end strategy. I went through that pretty quickly. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about what you're going to be doing over the next 4 weeks. And also happy to take questions about trends that we see. Like I said, we've been doing this report for 6 years now. We've got great data. And I'll do my best to answer questions from the current year, although like I said, I haven't had a chance to really dive into it yet.
Thank you, Kivi. Let's start with some questions people had about the survey. Jeff wonders, what do you see as the organization's most productive use of video between YouTube, Periscope, Snapchat, Vine? Where do we begin to focus our efforts?
You know, I would really focus on YouTube because of the SEO value. I mean, there's a value of video, period, regardless of which channel you use, and then it's a very engaging form of communication. But because Google owns YouTube, you get a lot of SEO juice out of YouTube. So I would start there and focus there first. The live streaming apps, you know, if you've got a use for them where it makes a lot of sense, then great, use them. But really as a long-term strategy for most nonprofits, I think you just want to focus on things like YouTube.
Great. And many people noted the lower satisfaction rate among development. Any hunches as to why that is?
Well, there have been a number of other surveys that have really looked at that, and a lot of it boils down to, you know, absurd expectations that people cannot live up to. So, and any of you that have worked in this sector or have worked for more than one organization are going to know what I'm saying is true. In a lot of organizations, they hire a development director and basically say, go raise all the money to run this place, and then don't give that person any support. They pretend like they're going to be a miracle worker that's going to be able to wave the magic wand and the money's going to start falling out of the trees. And of course, it doesn't work that way. There has to be a real commitment among everyone in the organization, but particularly the leadership team and the board, to help the development staff raise that money. And the communication staff needs to be a part of it too. So when you look at low job satisfaction and development, it's almost always because of unrealistic expectations and a lack of support and resources to actually get the job done. Who wants to be set up to fail? We set up the staff to fail all the time in this sector.
So true. And along that note, I'm wondering, what are some strategies for how communications team can build trust within their organization?
Well, it's the first step, I think, is actually communicating with each other and being explicit about who's going to do what and for what purpose and how that fits into the larger goal. So, one of the first things that we do when we coach teams that are sort of interdisciplinary, where you've got development staff and marketing staff, is have everybody talk about what they do and why they do it, and try to connect the dots between their different workload. When you have an organization that's very siloed, where the development staff and the communications staff don't talk, lots of times what you'll find is the communications people say, well, all those people over there care about is money. They don't care about engagement. They don't care about how people feel about our organization. They only care about the money. And then the development team will be sort of looking over at the marketing staff and saying, well, those people have it so easy. They're just trying to get our name in the press, and they just care about our brand and our logo, and, who cares about that? So, and of course, both of those are very short-sighted approaches to looking at your coworkers. When you actually sit down and talk about what you need to be a successful, growing concern in the sector that isn't scraping, but is actually succeeding in its mission, succeeding in building support for the cause, you need good marketing and you need good development. You need those people to bring their different skills to the table and work together. So we often talk about just opening up those lines of communication and helping them see how their different little pieces actually fit together. It seems like this really kind of silly, obvious thing to do, and yet most organizations that have staff like that aren't doing it. I think it's a real leadership failure, frankly, but it's something that has to be done. Talk to each other, please, talk to each other.
Thank you for that. What are your communications predictions for the next few years?
Wow, that's kind of a big question. Do you want to give me a little more specifics, Courtney?
What sorts of channels do you think we should focus our efforts? I noticed that Facebook is number one, but many people were surprised that there's not a lot of money going towards the ads. Everyone's putting their efforts into Facebook. Is it worth it anymore?
Well, okay, so here's the thing. I think, we're going to have to be doing multi-channel communications for a long, long time, probably forever. I mean, I sort of doubt that we're ever going back to the time where, back in the day, it was sort of print and media. That was it. Well, I think those days are long gone. Who knows what the next sort of big internet thing is going to be? I don't know. But I think you're always going to have to use multiple communications channels. Facebook is still the big dog, the big beast. I don't know how long that's going to last, but I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon. So I think you do want to invest in Facebook. Facebook owns Instagram. So, even if you pick up more sort of Instagram-style communications, you're still operating kind of in the Facebook worldview of things. So I think you do want to invest in understanding how Facebook and Instagram work together. I think you want to invest in understanding how Google works in terms of search, because your website is the one thing that you do have control over. But you got to make sure that Google and your website are simpatico and getting along, so they'll bring people to your website. And like I said, Google owns YouTube. So you want to make sure that you're thinking about a video strategy. I think if you focus there as the heart of your strategy, you've got a decent website, you're looking at video, you're doing some social media, and you're doing really good email. I didn't even mention email. I think you're going to be in decent shape.
Thank you. So switching gears a little bit, urgency, it takes precedent over important tasks. And, you know, that's a trend, but what are some ways we can get around that?
Well, we're actually sort of launching this program we're calling Calm, Not Busy. And Calm stands for something and busy stands for something. So Calm stands for being more collaborative and agile and logical and methodical. Okay, so built into that is knowing what is most important. You know, I just read something recently that said the word priorities as the plural is a fairly new word. You know, I think it was 60 or 70 years ago, that wasn't a word. It was just priority, as in one most important thing. And now we've made it plural, and people run around talking about their 10 priorities, which is ridiculous. You really can't have 10 priorities. So I think the first thing you have to do is really figure out what those things are. And maybe you can't figure out what the one thing is, but you should be able to figure out what maybe the 2 things are or the 3 things are. And then you have to stop. You have to stop because we don't have enough resources in this sector to have more than that as a priority. So you've really got to pick and choose. You've got to make hard decisions about where you're going to spend your time. I would rather see people do a really good job on a few things than to do a mediocre job on a bunch of things. So you have to pick and choose. And you're not going to get around things like urgent over important and too many competing priorities until you decide you have to decide.
So true. So speaking of priorities, emails, number 1. And people want to know, what's your recommendation on the frequency of sending emails?
So without talking to you about your goals, which, you know, is obviously very important, but we usually say the default is twice a month. And that would include your appeals and your newsletters. Now that is sort of just the baseline or the floor. I usually recommend that people do even more frequent email. If you're including all the stuff that you're sending out, then, you know, maybe even more like once a week. Maybe you've got a newsletter that's only once a month or twice a month, but you're sending out advocacy appeals or fundraising appeals, asking people to register for events, and that kind of stuff. You want the average person on your list to hear from you fairly regularly, because otherwise they're not going to recognize you in their inbox. Now, of course, you can overdo it, and this is where segmenting your list becomes really important, because there are a chunk of people on your mailing list that would love to hear from you all the time. Those of you that are doing advocacy work where people get super fired up about your stuff are going to be able to communicate much more frequently and not have people drop off. And you want to know who those people are. But at the same time, even with an advocacy organization, you're going to have people on your list that really only want to hear from you maybe once a month. Maybe they're only going to give in December. You don't want to communicate at a super high frequency with those people the same way that you would communicate with your sort of uber activist types. And so this is where it's really important to be able to segment your list and to sort of know who's who and let people decide which level of frequency they want to be in, which sub-lists they want to be on, so that you're getting the right content to the right people at the right frequency.
Great. And how about email newsletters? Should they be segmented, and should they include an ask? Debbie wonders, is the primary function to build awareness or get that CTA?
With a newsletter, if you're sending primarily to donors, if you think of the ask, think, report cycle, your newsletter is really the thinking and the reporting cycle. And even if you're not mailing to donors specifically or doing sort of a broader community engagement mailing, it really is more about reporting on what's going on and trying to make people feel like they're a part of something exciting and engaging. If you want people to do something, if you've got a very clear call to action, whether it's fundraising or registering for something or calling a congressman, you have to put that in a single topic email. You have to send an email that's just about that thing. Now, you can include calls to action in your newsletter, but don't be shocked if they don't produce much. The emails that really produce are the single topic emails when it comes to calls to action.
Perfect. And what advice do you have for learning and developing skills for email marketing? Shane wonders, is there any advice for the best way to plan for the new year email strategy?
Well, I would send you to nonprofitmarketingguide.com, and we definitely have information that's free on how to do email campaigns. We've got tips for email newsletters. There are a number of different organizations that have really good free advice online. If you just Google nonprofit email newsletter tips, I bet a bunch of stuff will come up.
Great. And how about, can you talk about staff retention? Any tips for a successful staff retention policy?
People want to feel like they're making a difference, right? I mean, that's, why else would you work in the nonprofit sector? Like, it's not for the money and the glory, right? So people are here because they're trying to make a difference in the world. So how do they know they're doing that? Well, they have the ability to make decisions about their work that they feel good about and that they see are going to have some kind of impact. So, I think a lot of it really does come down to empowering people to try things and to learn and to continue to grow themselves and then therefore grow their organizations. When I have a mentoring program, we train a lot of communications directors, and when I talk to the ones who are about to leave their job or are thinking about it, every time I talk to them on the phone, I can just envision their sad sack body language on the other end of the line. Most of the time what they're talking about is either no priorities, just being mobbed and swamped with work, and not understanding what's most important, and not feeling like their bosses care, like they're just a dumping ground. So, that's really frustrating to people. So give them priorities, or let them set the priorities. Either, if you're an executive director and you're not going to decide, well, then you need to delegate that decision to someone who will decide. But you can't just leave the big, messy pile on people's to-do lists. That's frustrating for everybody. So, empower people, listen to them, get specific about what you want folks to do, and let them go for it. I mean, I think that's what a lot of it comes down to. There's just so many things you can do in the communications world, and you can't do them all. So helping people really figure out a to-do list that they can feel good about and actually make progress on and check some things off for once instead of just adding new things, I think can go a long way in our sector.
Absolutely. And going back to your calm, not busy, is busy an acronym? And if so, what does it stand for?
It is an acronym. Okay, now let's see if I can remember it off the top of my head. So B stands for bogus, pretending like you're getting stuff done when you're actually not. U is unrealistic, and we've talked about that a little bit, about having unrealistic expectations for people and for your own to-do list. S is sidestepping. Again, we've talked about in terms of not making decisions and not making the hard decisions. And then Y is yoked, and that one is being tied to your notifications coming in on your phone, and I'm really thinking of the yoking as the electronic yoking, where people are just, so hooked on the pinging from email and Facebook and everywhere else that you can never sort of disengage and actually get any strategic thinking done. If you all are interested in more of this, if you just Google "calm not busy," all is one word, the posts that we've been writing on our blog will come up, and we've got some little infographics too.
Great, thank you. Switching gears to fundraising, do you have any suggestions for marketing to and thanking those long-time major contributors at the end of the year?
You know, the personal touch goes a really long way. I would recommend, you know, if you're sort of thinking, oh, do we buy hats or do we buy plaques or do we buy this or that, I would encourage you to stop thinking about what you're going to buy and start thinking about the kind of quality time you could spend with those donors, whether it has to be on the phone because of distance or if you can actually get in the same room with them and really talk to them about the impact that their generosity is making in the world. Really help them see that what's important to them, what they value, you are transforming that into real change. You are the vehicle through which they are really leaving a legacy. I mean, that's what major donors are donating for, is because they believe in you. They believe in what you're trying to do, and they're trying to make change. They're not doing it for another T-shirt, trust me. So, you know, have a conversation with them about that. Make sure that they understand that impact and really listen to ways that maybe they can do more or want to do more. You know, sometimes donors are going to sort of go down a weird path that you don't want to take the organization on, but you can have a conversation about that. That's going to be much better than, you know, just sending them some lame thank you gift.
Totally. And is year-end campaigning right for everyone? What if your organization's fundraising is membership-based with periodic capital campaigns? Should you link your fundraising to a major event earlier in the year instead of later in the year?
You know, you have to map it out, right? So lots of people get in these situations where it's like, oh, we have a golf tournament the day before Giving Tuesday or whatever. You know, you end up like just cramming everything and having the proverbial traffic jam in your communications calendar. So what you want to do is you want to do what we call it the big picture communications timeline, and you literally draw out a big timeline. And I either do this on a massive whiteboard if we have access to that. If not, we get like the big butcher paper and just scroll it out on the floor. And so you might have a timeline that's literally, you know, 6 or 8 feet long. And you map out the year. You map out what is happening when. And you really look at where your overlap is. So when we do this, we make sure that we have the fundraising staff and not just, you know, the campaign staff, but if you've got major donor staff, all those people talking about what their world looks like, what their day in the life of their organization looks like from their perspective. You get the fundraising people on there, you get the marketing communications, you get your major program directors to talk about the big milestones and issues and timelines over the course of the year for them, and you put it all on this one timeline. And you see what doesn't make sense. There's always something on there that's like, why are we doing that? No wonder we all want to kill each other during this month. This is why. So you can fix those things. And then you can also see where you have gaps, where it makes sense to sort of fill in some of these other asks where you can move them. Maybe it makes sense to move that membership appeal. Maybe it makes sense to move that capital campaign schedule. You can't really have those conversations when you're just sort of looking at one little piece. You have to draw out the big picture communications timeline to make a good decision about that.
Great ideas. So we have time for one more question. Kathy wonders, any quick tips for a good donor retention program?
Stay in the ask, thank, report cycle. That's the best thing you can do. Okay, so that's something that Tom Ahern, I think, came up with and that a lot of us have latched onto because it's perfect and brilliant. So, you know, you're asking and then you're thinking and then you're reporting back on what you did with the money. You're asking, thinking, reporting, asking, thinking, reporting. You've got to stay in that cycle. If you can do that, then you're going to be fine. People are going to keep giving. If you just ask, little thank you, ask, little reporting at the end of the year, ask, it doesn't work. You really have to really marry the gratitude and the reporting back, which is really showing them that you're doing what you promised you were going to do with their money before you ask again. But if you can do that well, you will retain more donors.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kivi. That was really excellent. And thank you to all of you who joined today. I hope you found this as informative as I did. We covered a lot, but as I mentioned, you will receive an email within 48 hours with a link to the full recording and slide deck of today's event. And lastly, please keep checking npo.gs/GuideStar webinars for free events and informational sessions on the topics nonprofit professionals care about most. Don't forget to register for our January 26th GuideStar webinar on new nonprofit profiles, the preview, to your organization's full story front and center. Visit npo.gs/profiles demo to register. There are a ton of exciting profile changes underway at GuideStar, so you do not want to miss this one. So thanks again, everyone, and I hope you have a great day. Kivi, any closing thoughts?
Go out there and keep talking to each other and keep talking to the world and changing it for the better. Y'all are doing amazing work. Just keep at it.
Love it. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.